This is Adventure for Life. I'm Joel, again continuing the Grenadier review, kind of first impressions series. Looking forward to the long trip I'm going to start in a few weeks. I told you last week that I had gone on a 3,000 mile trip, drove from the southeast to the northeast all the way up to Maine, spent a couple weeks up there and then turned around, came back. About a 1,500 mile drive each way. Drove about 12 hours the first day, about 10 hours the second day on each trip. So got a lot of seat time, spent a lot of time in the vehicle, and you know, I know I've done review on it already on various aspects of the vehicle, but I thought after driving this long way I would do that again, because you know, after you take little short trips and you don't really necessarily get a really good feel for the vehicle. I'm now at 6,399 miles, let's call it 6,400. And again, 3,000 of those miles were done in a 2-week time period. So, all right, so let's move on. What's the not so good? These are not in any particular order, by the way. In fact, the one that probably aggravated me the most is somewhere in the middle. So let's start with the steering wheel position. I don't like it. I happen to own right now 5 other vehicles that are all GM. And one of them was built in the 1970s, one of them was built in the 1980s, and all of them have a way to adjust the steering wheel that's here, so it allows you to tilt this part of the steering wheel. This is that bar only, and you can go up and you can go down, but you notice the position of the steering wheel doesn't really change that much. I mean, I want the steering wheel to be tilted like this, and you don't have the ability to adjust the steering wheel. Now, I know other cars are like that too, but it is very nice to be able to adjust the steering column in this area and adjust the orientation of the steering wheel. Again, everybody's going to have their own perspective on this kind of stuff, but that's something that to me is just, it's not great, and it'd been so easy to figure that out and to look at some competitive vehicles and whatnot. People that have been, this is the first year they've, the first vehicle they ever made. Well, they shouldn't have gone and looked at some other vehicles. The Suburban would have been a perfect one to compare against. We talked about gas mileage, but is the gas mileage poor? Well, I don't know. I mean, 15 miles per gallon, as far as I'm concerned. I got several vehicles that get 15 miles a gallon, so it does not bother me a bit that this thing gets what most people would consider to be poor gas mileage. What does bother me is the range. I ran this thing down to probably, it was giving me the warning sound about, hey, you're getting ready to run out of gas, stop now, and all that kind of stuff. I put in, I think, 21 gallons at one point. And so, I don't know exactly what the gas tank size is, but let's call it 22, maybe 23, whatever. My other vehicles that get 14, 15 miles a gallon like this one does have 38 gallon gas tanks. So you basically can drive this vehicle down the interstate for, 3 hours max, and then you're out of range. And so, that to me is an issue. Other people have mentioned that, especially people in Australia that don't have a gas station on every corner. Obviously, there's plenty of gas stations, but the fact that the range is limited to basically 250 miles realistically. Could you drive at 300? Yeah, but you'd be breathing fumes, or the car would be breathing fumes by the time it got done. Visibility. So last week I mentioned the visibility. The visibility out the front is just fine. But as I mentioned before, the visibility out the back it's abysmal. I mean, it really is poor when you try to see out the back of the vehicle. Now it's got a camera, so when you put it in reverse, you can watch the camera or whatnot. And it's not that big of a problem, driving down the interstate, you're not, there's not people weaving in all around you and whatnot, but the visibility out the back window is poor. Talk about brakes. I mentioned last week that the acceleration on this vehicle is better than I expected. The brakes are not as good as I would have expected. I actually got to one point where I was exiting the interstate and the turn was sharper than most, and it had just rained and there happened to be a truck stop at that particular place, and the car either slid a little bit or the ABS kicked in to the point where, I mean, I literally was a couple of feet from sliding off of the paved road onto, you know, a gravel shoulder or whatever. Did I exit the highway maybe a little quicker than I should have with that sharp corner? Well, I didn't know the sharp corner was there until, you know, it was late enough that I had to get on the brakes pretty hard. Anyway, but even not just that one experience, the brakes in general, if you have to brake hard, you don't have everything you'd like to have when it comes to braking. Okay, so here's my number one negative issue, and you've heard other people mention it, I'm gonna mention it again. It's the stupid Nanny systems that they have on this. Now, if you're just gonna drive this across town and then turn around and drive back home, maybe it's not that big a deal. But when you get in the car, I was driving cross country, so every 3 hours I'm stopping, getting gas, shutting the car off, getting back in, turning it back on, and every time I get in the car and I have to turn off 3 of the Nanny systems because they turn themselves back on automatically every time you turn the car off. And that is the speed limit sensor. You know, and if you only go a couple of miles an hour over the speed limit, it starts dinging and flashing stuff on the dashboard and all this stuff. It's just ridiculous. Give me the ability to leave it on if I want it, but turn it off permanently, and don't make me have to turn it off every single time I get in the car. The lane departure warning. Guess what? I, along with everybody else, are not perfect drivers, and sometime you get over next to the line, either the line on the left or the line on the right, and it dings and makes some stupid sound. And when you turn it off, it puts a display on the dash in front of you. So there's this little light aggravating you right where the steering wheel is. And it's very frustrating. And again, you have to turn it off every single time. And even when you do turn it off, it's got this little indicator light that's on your dashboard right in front of where your eyes are, and it's very frustrating. Then the final thing is the button where you can auto stops your car. So here's the auto stop start button. Lots of cars have them these days, and so you pull up to a stoplight and you're waiting for the light to turn green. It turns your engine off to theoretically save gas. Well, everybody's gonna have their own perspective on that. I think it's the stupidest thing in the world, because it may be saving me 0.03 of a cent in gas. What's it doing to the starter? What's it doing to the engine, starting and stopping, starting and stopping all the time? Anyway, that's not my complaint at the moment. My complaint is that every time that you get in the car, you have to turn it off again because it automatically turns itself on. So that the Nanny systems are really ridiculous. I have this truck that I told you, it's a 21 GMC Denali. My daughter drives an Acadia, a GMC Acadia. They have the Nanny systems on them, but you can turn them off. And you turn them off once, and you don't have to deal with it again. So you can hear the frustration in my voice. It really, really, really was aggravating. And interestingly, I got a review email from Ineos today that I filled out, and this was my number one issue. And I just said point blank, and I've heard other people say this, and it sounds like an overstatement, but if they don't fix it, I'll never buy another one. I mean, it's that bad. It's that irritating to me to every time I get in the car have to punch a bunch of buttons just to overcome systems that in my opinion you ought to be able to do once and be done with it. Okay, enough said on that. Rear storage. Again, I just mentioned this, or I mentioned it last week. We have a Suburban, we have a GMC Acadia, and I actually got in the Acadia right before I made this video. And the reality is is that the storage in the back, obviously this doesn't hold a candle to the Suburban, but it's not even as good as the Acadia is with the third row seats down. And so while, you know, is there sufficient room for what I need in this vehicle at this moment? Sure. If I do a little overlanding, am I gonna have enough room? Yeah, but, and again, to me, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just something that you need to know, that the storage is, you know, it's maybe not as great as you think it ought to be. Let's talk about storage in the front now. And, you know, again, not complaining about this, but it's just not up to the standards that we have in the United States, I would say. You know, and this is an interesting thing. Here's a water bottle. Look how small that water bottle is. You hear the squeak? That water bottle is tight. You're surely not going to get a can of any size or a cup of any size in there. You've got this this storage here. I did use the in the door storage some, you know, so it's not terrible, and to me that's not a critical issue, but it's certainly not up to what our typical standards would be. The seat position I talked about last week is a good thing. One thing that I learned on this trip is I was thinking, when you pull this up, you see how the seat moves, and it appears in some ways that the back is actually leaning further forward. And I actually like the back of my seat kind of forward and whatnot, and you can adjust that with this. But this bar here is really just raising the seat, the whole seat up. I don't think it's leaning you forward much, and so there, you know, the seat positioning could be a little bit better than it is. Steering radius, you've already heard this talked about. Steering radius is poor. You know, when do I see it? Pulling into a parking spot. And you guys feel free to laugh at me if you want to, but again, I drive a fair amount of the time a 1-ton dually quad cab pickup truck, and I can pull into a parking spot just fine. This thing, not so much. When you go to pull into a parking spot, the vast majority of the time, it takes me 2 shots to get in there. And again, feel free to laugh if you want to. You get yours and you'll understand. Am I complaining about that? Am I mad about it? No, but it's just something that is not as nice as you would like it to be. Moving on to the back doors. Again, this is something that's been discussed multiple times, but you saw me open these doors earlier. And, you know, the beauty of the doors is that you have this wide, very wide opening, and the doors basically open, you know, 90 degrees, or in this case, even more than 90 degrees, well, probably in both. But, you know, the whole, you know, concept they had of, and I mentioned this before, the whole concept they had of you're going to use this small door when you only have small things to put in is really just, I tried on this trip that I went on several times to put in like my computer bag, to just reach in there and put it in. Well, invariably there's something else in there that needs to be arranged or whatnot. And the whole idea that you're going to use that little door and do anything with it is really just silly. I mean, maybe somebody's going to write in and say, oh yeah, I use it for this or for that, but it's really not. You're going to open both doors pretty much every time you need to get into the back, which is fine. It doesn't bother me at all, but just that whole idea that that small door is useful for something I'm debunking it. The table. This table is cool. It's great. Lots of people are getting it. And you know, when I got it, I'm like shaking this thing going, man, that thing is really solid and it's not going to rattle, because I was afraid it was going to rattle or whatnot. Well, it rattles. And I don't know exactly how. They clearly have taken steps to try to ensure that it doesn't rattle. This thing is solid, but I think what's happening is it doesn't rattle all the time. It rattles at certain speeds. So I think there's like a resonance, a vibration in the car that you don't necessarily feel, that will be identified once you install this table, if you do it. It's not a lot. Like, I usually drive, 80 miles an hour on the interstate. It was fine. When I'd edge up to 83, 84, I'd hear it start rattling, and it would rattle the entire time I was at that speed. You go over a bumpy area, a bumpy road, something like that, you'll hear it rattle. And it rattles enough that it is irritating when it does it. You kind of get used to it and you start ignoring or whatnot, but I've even thought about getting maybe some kind of, I'm going to try to open this with one hand, probably won't be able to do it. Trying to get some kind of styrofoam or some kind of soft thing to put there so that when I close this, it's there and kind of holding it in place, maybe dulling that sound. Okay, that's it for the not so good. I'm going to mention a couple of things. I'm just going to call them creature comforts that I took notice of on this trip. And I noticed them before, but since I'm doing this video, I thought I'd go ahead and name them. One, and feel free again to laugh at me for mentioning this, there's no built-in garage door opener. I'm used to that. Is it a big deal to carry around a garage door opener? No. But the fact that it's not built in is just something that we've become used to. Remote start. I have remote start on a couple of my vehicles. Used to it. I remember when I first got remote start, I thought, I'll never use that. Well, yeah, I do. I use, especially if it's cold and the car's sitting outside. When I was working before, I would remote start my car from my office on a very regular basis, and in the wintertime. And even in the summer, if it was really hot, I would get it started and let the air conditioner run and whatnot. So remote start. Keyless start, that's separate. I got real used to putting my key in my pocket and never having to reach in and get it out. Well, as you know, one of the things that they talked about is, hey, you got a real key. Well, you do have a real key, and you have to, every time you get in the car, get that real key out and punch the button and, pop the key out and start the car. Again, big deal? No, but I'm going to again call it a creature comfort that we've become used to. And as others have mentioned, the fact that there's no mirror. My wife got in the car, she's sitting over there, she pulls the thing down and the visor down, and she's like, where's the mirror? Well, there's not one. There's not one on either side. There are a couple of others that are skipping my memory at this moment, but love the car. Glad I got it, enjoyed the trip greatly, but there are some things that you'd like to see some improvements are, and at least for me, those are the ones that kind of landed on my radar screen. All right, see you next week.